Here's a number that should bother you more than it does. 90,000. That's how many hours the average American spends working over the course of a lifetime. Roughly 1/3 of every waking hour you have, from the time you enter the workforce to the time you leave it, if you leave it, handed over to an employer in exchange for the ability to pay for the rest of your life. Most people accept this as normal, natural even. The assumption runs so deep that we barely notice it anymore. Of course humans work this much. What else would we do? Here's what the archaeological record says. For 95% of human history, for roughly 290,000 of our 300,000 years as a species, the concept of employment did not exist. No wages, no schedules, no boss, no career. And the people living that way were, by almost every skeletal measure, healthier than the people who replaced them. The question isn't whether our ancestors worked less. The evidence is clear that they did. The real question, the one that takes a while to sit with, is what they did instead, and why we stopped. In 1966, at the Man the Hunter Symposium at the University of Chicago, an anthropologist named Richard Lee presented findings that made the room go quiet. Lee had spent weeks tracking the daily activities of the hoansi, a sand people in the Dobe area of the Kalahari Desert, one of the few groups still living in something close to the original human pattern. He had documented exactly how much time they spent acquiring food. The number was 12 to 19 hours per week, not per day, per week. A woman might spend 2 to 3 days gathering enough plant food to last her family through the week, then not go out again. A man might hunt for several days, bring back meat, and then not hunt again for 2 or 3 weeks. Lee's observation was that a successful hunt or gathering trip didn't prompt more hunting or more gathering. It prompted rest. Other researchers found similar patterns. The Hadza in Tanzania, the Aceh in Paraguay, the Martu in Australia. Different environments, different continents, radically different ecologies. Same result, consistently, across every group studied. 15 to 20 hours per week on subsistence activities. You probably work more than twice that. Now, some of you are already thinking the obvious objection. These are modern people living in depleted environments with reduced game populations. How do we know ancient humans, actual prehistoric humans, lived the same way? The answer is in the bones. When paleoanthropologists compare pre-agricultural skeletons to the skeletons of early farming populations from the same regions, the contrast is not subtle. Pre-agricultural humans were taller. Their teeth were dramatically healthier. Cavities were rare because their diet was varied and not grain-heavy. Their joints showed significantly less wear from repetitive physical labor. Their overall bone density and musculature suggests better nutrition and less chronic physical strain. The early farmers who replaced them were shorter by an average of 4 to 5 inches. Their spines showed the kind of curvature that comes from years of bending over fields. Their teeth were riddled with cavities. Multiple studies have found evidence of nutritional deficiencies in early agricultural populations that were simply absent in their hunter-gatherer predecessors. The bones tell the same story the behavioral data tells. For most of human history, people were not grinding themselves down with labor. They were doing something else with their time. So what were they actually doing? The evidence is more specific than most people expect, and a lot of it comes from things that have no survival value whatsoever. In 1994, spelunkers exploring a cliff face in southern France discovered a hidden cave. Chauvet Cave, as it came to be known, contained paintings dated to approximately 36,000 years ago. Not rough scratches, not crude outlines, horses rendered with implied motion, lions with shaded musculature, rhinoceroses in perspective. Whoever painted these animals understood anatomy, understood light, understood how to convey movement on a static surface, and then went 300 meters deep into a cave, by firelight, to do it where almost no one would ever see. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found shell beads dated to 100,000 years ago. Tiny holes drilled through seashells. The nearest coastline was 20 kilometers away. Someone walked 40 kilometers round trip to collect shells, then spent hours, probably days, drilling them with stone tools, not for food, not for shelter, to wear them. In 2008, researchers in Germany found a vulture bone flute dated to at least 40,000 years ago. 5 finger holes, precisely spaced and calibrated. Whoever made this understood musical pitch well enough to engineer for it. They spent significant time on an object that produced nothing, grew nothing, protected nothing. These aren't anomalies. Across every inhabited continent, archaeological sites from 100,000 years onward are dense with objects requiring hours of skilled, focused work with no immediate practical payoff. Carefully carved tools far more elaborate than their function required. Decorated objects with no evident use. Evidence of pigment preparation and application stretching back over 300,000 years. The conclusion is unavoidable. When humans weren't securing food, which was most of the time, they were making things, decorating things, adorning themselves, and producing what we would now call art, not as a luxury. As a default, let's put a real day together. You wake near dawn. The fire from the previous night still has coals. Someone feeds it. Breakfast is casual. Whatever was left from the day before, eaten sitting down while people talk. No urgency. The food situation is fine. Yesterday's hunt was good, or the gathering trip 3 days ago produced enough to carry the group for several more days. This looseness around food timing is a consistent feature of hunter-gatherer life that Western researchers kept finding surprising. Food didn't need to be acquired every day. A successful effort could sustain a group for days, which meant that on many mornings, the first decision was genuinely open. What actually needs doing today? Sometimes the answer was a hunt or a gathering trip. A small group would head out mid-morning, not every day, only when the larder needed restocking. But on a day without a food run, something else happened. People worked on things, not in the modern sense of the word. No clock, no supervisor, no quota. Someone might spend hours carefully shaping a stone tool, not because they needed it urgently, but because a well-made tool was respected, because craftsmanship was part of identity, because making something well was simply satisfying in itself. Someone else might work on a hide, softening it through hours of patient scraping, turning raw animal skin into usable material. Someone else might be making beads, drilling through shells with a stone point, stringing them on sinew. Children played within sight of adults, which meant they were also watching, learning by observation, not by instruction. By age 6 or 7, Hadza children can identify the edible plants in their environment. By adolescence, the gap between their practical knowledge and an adult's is small. The learning wasn't scheduled. It was ambient. By early to mid-afternoon on most days, the active part of the day was winding down. And then came the part of the day that anthropologists consistently found strangest to document, because it looked, from the outside, like nothing. People sat. They talked. They groomed each other the way all primates do, reinforcing social bonds through physical contact. They played with children. They napped. James Uzzman, who has spent decades studying the hoansi, documented that adults in hunter-gatherer groups spend approximately 6 hours per day in what he simply called social time, not working, not sleeping, being with other people without an agenda. This wasn't laziness. It was the social infrastructure of a group whose survival depended entirely on the quality of its internal relationships. In a world without legal contracts, without police, without institutional enforcement of any kind, the only thing that guaranteed someone would share food with you when you were sick or injured was whether they genuinely liked you and felt a bond with you. The 6 hours of daily social time was not economically unproductive. It was the investment that kept the whole system running. Then the sun went down. And this is where the day gets genuinely strange by modern standards. University of Utah anthropologist Polly Wiessner has spent more than 40 years studying the hoansi. In a 2014 paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, she documented something that seems obvious in retrospect, but had never been formally measured before. The content of daytime conversations is completely different from the content of conversations around the fire at night. During the day, she found 31% of conversations were about practical economic matters, who saw animal tracks where, which plants were ready, logistics. Another 34% were complaints, criticism, gossip, the social regulation work of keeping a group functional. Only 6% were stories. After dark, around the fire, those numbers flipped completely. 81% of conversations were stories, myths about the origin of things, tales about ancestors who did extraordinary things, accounts of what happened far away among people no one present had ever met. speculation about what exists beyond the horizon. Wiessner's interpretation was that fire, by extending the usable day beyond sunset, created the conditions for something that couldn't happen in daylight: imagination. In the dark, with immediate practical concerns suspended, the human mind turned naturally toward things that couldn't be seen, touched, or acted on directly: the past, the future, the invisible, the possible. Fire didn't just cook food, it created the original space where culture happened. She also noted something modern audiences find uncomfortable. When artificial light eventually replaced fire, it didn't extend the contemplative evening into more of the same. It turned potential story time into potential work time. The laptop in the home office, the email before bed, work spilling into the hours that, for 300,000 years, had belonged to something else entirely. And before sleep came, because they had no artificial light to suppress the natural hormonal signals, humans slept differently than you do. Historical records from medieval Europe, confirmed by a 1992 sleep study by psychiatrist Thomas Ware, document the same pattern. Before artificial light, humans slept in two phases. First, sleep of roughly 4 hours, then a wakeful period of 1 to 2 hours, used for reflection, conversation, sometimes prayer, sometimes visiting neighbors, then second sleep until dawn. The condition modern people call waking up at 3 a.m. and being unable to sleep. For most of human history, that wasn't a disorder. That was just the middle of the night. Then, around 10,000 years ago, something changed. In the Fertile Crescent, modern-day Iraq, Syria, southeastern Turkey, people began deliberately planting seeds and managing animal populations. Agriculture. The Standard Story presents this as progress, a leap forward. Humans, finally, taking control of their food supply. The skeletal evidence doesn't support this framing. Early agricultural populations were shorter, sicker, more nutritionally deficient, and worked measurably harder than the hunter-gatherers they replaced. Their spines curved from repetitive field labor. Their teeth decayed from grain-heavy diets. Infectious disease spread more easily in the dense settlements that farming enabled. By the metrics of individual human well-being, the only metrics that matter to an individual human, the transition to agriculture was not an improvement. So why did it win? Because agriculture could feed more people per square mile. More people meant larger groups. Larger groups could defend territory more effectively, accumulate more resources, and in competition with smaller groups, consistently prevailed. It wasn't that farming produced better lives. It produced more lives, and in a competition between populations, that's what mattered. The trap wasn't that farming was worse. The trap was that once you started, you couldn't stop. Every generation of farming meant a larger population. A larger population required more food. More food required more farming. Within a few generations, the population had grown large enough that abandoning agriculture meant starvation. The exit disappeared behind you. With larger populations came specialization. Toolmakers, potters, soldiers, administrators, priests. People whose entire role was to serve a function in a system rather than to meet their own needs directly. The concept of labor as something exchanged for resources, the foundation of every employment relationship ever since, emerged from this specialization. The 90,000-hour working life wasn't a natural feature of being human. It was an institutional byproduct of a population trap that closed 10,000 years ago and has never fully reopened. Here's what I keep coming back to. Richard Lee's hoansi study has been critiqued extensively in the decades since he published it. The numbers may be somewhat lower than reality. The sample period may have been unusually favorable. The critique is fair. 12 to 19 hours is probably the optimistic end of the range, but even the critics' higher estimates cluster around 20 to 35 hours per week. Not 40, not 50, not 60. And those people working 20 to 35 hours a week, spending the rest of their time in social connection, craft, art, rest, and story. Were taller, had healthier teeth, showed less physical damage in their skeletons, and by behavioral evidence, spent significant time doing things that had no purpose except to be done well or to be heard by firelight. Wiessner, in the 2014 paper, asks a question she doesn't fully answer. When artificial light turned evening social time into potential work time, what happened to the relationships that social time maintained? What happened to the stories? She doesn't know. She raises the question and moves on. But here's the thing she didn't need to say. You already know the answer. You know it in the difference between how you feel after a long conversation with someone you care about and how you feel after a long session on a screen. You know it in the peculiar restlessness of Sunday evenings when the weekend is ending and the week is about to start. You know it in the way you sometimes wake up at 3 in the morning, mind running, and can't quite explain why. Your brain was built for a different schedule. It remembers something your conscious mind has mostly forgotten, not with any emotion you can name. Just a kind of low-grade chronic wrongness. Like you're always slightly behind on something you can't quite identify. The hoansi don't have a word for that feeling. They didn't need one.